Ah, we're good to go.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Homa Book Lunch series. The book lunch is a forum of acknowledgement of critical engagement with work being produced in and on the African continent by particularly but relevant to the Homa intellectual agenda and research focus. Today, we have invited to our book lunch series Dr. Ramzi ibn Amara, who is one of the upcoming scholars in Islamic studies. He is currently teaching at the Department of Anthropology in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of Sousse. He's also he is also the coordinator of Al Maghrib in Transition Project, which is it's also at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at University of Sousse, which is a German Tunisian research collaboration that started in 2013, working on religion and religious and political discourses in the post-revolution Tunisia. His master's dissertation focused on the development of Sharia laws in Nigeria before, during, and after the colonial times. And in 2011, he completed a PhD project on the Izala reform movement in Nigeria at the University of Bayreuth in Germany. The title of his dissertation is The Izala Movement in Nigeria, Its Split Relationship to Sufis and Perceptions of Sharia Re-implementation. Additionally, he was part of a project on religious engagement at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, what's between 2011 and 2012, where he worked on Muslim activists in Nigeria. His research interest includes Islam in Africa, Sufism, reform movements, religious activism, and Islamic laws. Today, he will present for us his book titled The Izala Movement in Nigeria, Genesis, Fragmentations, and Revival, which is published by the University of Göttingen Press in Germany in the series of social and cultural anthropology. We will have also today the discussant of Ramzi's book with Miss Amina Sulaimani, who is currently a doctoral research fellow at the Institute for Humanities in Africa, University of Cape Town. Her current research is on the intersection of artificial intelligence, care, and the future of hospitals, with a particular focus on access to cancer treatment. She holds a master's thesis in social anthropology from the London School of Economics. She is interested in questions of imperial durabilities, the decolonial alternative, social marginality, and immaterial archives. She is a Moroccan writer, thinker, and a feminist activist whose work can be found in diverse fora across the web. She's also an alumna of the African Leadership University in Mauritius and has previously worked at multiple international organizations such as the UN Refugee Agency, Ashinaga, and at the African Union. So I welcome Ramzi, and the floor is yours, and we expect the 20 minutes presentation maximum, and then after that we will listen to Amina. Please, Ramzi, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Azza. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the organization, and thank you to Homa also for hosting this let's say conversation or debate about this publication. I want also to thank Amina Suleiman for her contribution and for her critical reading, and I expect more questions than probably more than you expect from my side probably. Let me say for the beginning, let me state that this publication is the result of several years and working on the Izala movement. Nevertheless, as you know, and working in the social and social sciences and humanities, that religious phenomena, the religious movements are dynamic. And probably my work doesn't go beyond 2012 in relationship to the Izala movement. And it was my last possibility to access the field at another time. Probably you know why, and if you related to Boko Haram, it was not easy to access Nigeria at the time. It was important to mention that date because I spoke a lot in my book about the division, about the conflict between the Izala factions, and indeed, well, I never expected a kind of reunification of the movement, but it happened end of 2011, beginning of 2012. That means probably that another colleague or another scholar may update the work that I'm presenting here in relationship to the Izala movement. So it means there is a lot of work to be done on the reunification and what happened after my after my book, so it can be a step beyond. I plan to speak a little bit about Nigeria, about Muslim community in Nigeria, about Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi, his influence on the movement. Later on, I will speak on the Izala founder himself, Sheikh Ismail Idris, and then I will probably have to link the movement to what happened in Nigeria in '99 with the re-implementation of the so-called Sharia in the Fourth Republic in '99 of the country. Probably, and as you know, Nigeria is multifaceted in many aspects, while culturally, linguistically, ethnically, and religiously, the two important groups of probably religious communities are Muslims and Christians, but also there are other regions of African traditional religions who cannot be ignored in the country. When I started working in Nigeria, the country has almost 140 million people. Now it is probably more than 200 million. What I can say about Nigeria, especially about Islam and the country, it has a long tradition, and it has different dates. Sometimes we speak of the first contact with North Africa from the 8th century. Other scholars speak of the 11th and the 14th, in two sides. Sometimes we speak of the contact through the Sokoto, northeast. Sometimes we speak of the contact through Borno, northwest. But we know that differently what happened to East Africa. We have contact with Kazan in Libya, with Egypt, and then with Tunisia, and generally with North Africa. And this contact took place several centuries ago between Nigeria and West Africa generally, and North Africa, Egypt, Tunisia, especially Libya, and sometimes to some extent also Algeria. As you may know, in Nigeria, we have the Maliki School of Law, which is dominating in Nigeria, and established through this contact with the North. Probably some of you know that in Sunni Islam we have four schools: the Hanafi, the Shafi'i, the Hanbali, and the Maliki School of Law. And the one existing in Nigeria is the Maliki School of Law. What is also important about the history of Islam in Nigeria is the importance of Sufi brotherhoods, and mainly the importance of the Qadiriyya and the Tijaniya. The Qadiri is a little bit older. It has its roots in the 12th century Iraq, and it came to West Africa in the 15th century, while the Tijaniya is originated from Algeria, and it came in the 19th century through Morocco and Mauritania to West Africa, especially to Senegal, and then in the 19th century, probably in the first half of the 19th century, it came to Nigeria through Sheikh Omar Tal on his way to Hajj to Mecca when the Tijaniya, well, took place or started, well, being initiated in Nigeria. Well, the Turuq or the Sufi Brotherhoods play a crucial role in the expanding Islamic thought, expanding Islamic or Islam as a religion, also in relationship to teaching of Arabic language, of fiqh, of theology. Well, Sufi Brotherhoods contributed also a lot in this direction. Also another point, which is important to mention here today, also we have while the religious landscape, we have probably Salafi groups, while Izala is also part of these Salafi groups. We have probably another type of groups, prophetic groups. We had this experience in the 80s with the Maiketsine, and in the 80s, kind of prophetic movement within the Islamic community. We have radical groups like Boko Haram, what is going on in Nigeria. But let me say that the landscape, the religious landscape is very complex. And I will show that for some examples a little later on. What is important probably, according to my opinion, is the affiliation to one of those groups, and then religious borders or religious affiliation in Nigeria is a common practice, but crossing the boundaries and joining another affiliation is also possible, but it has social implication. So if you change, if you are a Sufi and join Izala, it has an implication in your social environment, on your family, probably on your social status, but it happens every day. Um, um, the other way around, during my field work at the time, and let me say that I visited Nigeria 4 times, 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2012. Um, and I would say that between brackets, converting or changing the orientation to Salafism is probably more possible than the other way around. I interviewed only one person during my field work who really left Salafism to join Sufism at that time. This is probably a broad introduction. Let me go to more detail related especially to the 20th century, where we have reform ideas from the 60s. So if we go back, we have the history of Sufism, Qadiriyya Tijaniya. Then we have in the 19th century a kind of Islamic state, the so-called Sokoto Caliphate. And then in the 20th century, especially in the 60s, 1960s and 70s, we have a kind of revival of reform ideas. And one of the leaders of those reform ideas was Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi, who lived between 1922 and 1992. And Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi was the first Qadi of Nigeria, who was the one who translated the Quran into Hausa language, he was really close to the political institution, he was the translator and the advisor of Sarduna, Ahmad Bello, and he accompanied him to especially to Arabic and Muslim countries. And then Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi played a role to some extent. He was considered as a mujaddid, renewer of religion. If we go back to these ideas that every 100 years that the renewer will come and will renew the religion. Another aspect of the influence of Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi, that he criticized Sufism and Sufi Brotherhoods in the 70s, and his criticism was more or less a kind of intellectual criticism. He produced literature in Arabic language. Even this literature was Unitarian literature, was a kind of he wrote al-Aqidah al-Sahiha, the right the right for faith, how to behave in accordance with the Sharia. And this book was written in the 70s, beginning of the 70s in Arabic. And then the answer to Abu Bakr was also intellectual. At that time, the Qadiriyya Sheikh and the Tijaniya responded also in form of also of books, answer to Abu Bakr Gumi. So you see that this debate and this discourse were more or less an intellectual debate during the 70s about criticizing Sufism, criticizing what is the right, how to behave like a Muslim, how to be a Muslim, and so on. But more probably one of the important figures also at the time in the 70s or under the 70s was Sheikh Ismail Idris, who was a student of Abu Bakr Gumi. Sheikh Ismail Idris died in 2000. Ismail Idris was an imam at the Nigerian army. He probably was influenced by his sheikh, Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi. But Abu Bakr Ismail Idris took the debate to the masses. You know, he took the book of Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi and really attacked Sufism and then being affiliated to the brotherhoods. So the debate was open. So you see here, you have two figures against Sufism. At one moment, you have Sheikh Ismail Idris, who was preaching in Kaduna and other places in northern Nigeria. At one particular point, he left the Nigerian army and he went to Jos and he established the Izala, the Izala movement or the Izala organization in 1978. And it is interesting here to say that the Izala was found in Jos, in Plateau State, and then it is also meaningful to say that the movement was established in an area which is not dominated by Muslims, let's say. It is not even established in an area where the majority are Muslims. You see, and this is symbolic for the establishment of the movement. Well, Ismail Idris was jailed several times, were relocated to other places, but then he left the army to establish the Izala in 78. And even the establishment of the movement with other local scholars, even if it took place in 78, the registration of the movement, we see the reaction of other Muslim groups against the Izala itself. And at the same time, I mentioned that the 80s was characterized by the emergence of the Maitetsina, this violent movement, this prophetic movement. And, you know, Izala was also approached of using violence and so on. But at that time, it decided to distance itself from violence and to especially to concentrate on education and especially of education of women. So Izala, well, if you go back to the publication by Osman Khan, it is a Salafi movement. It is based on the Quran and the Sunnah and the tradition of Salaf al-Salih, the three generation of the death of the Prophet. But also it adopts modern tools of modern state. That's why Osman Khan qualified it as a project of modernity. So Izala, by going back to the tradition, it is also you know, establishing kind of project of modernity according to Osman Khan. I may say that the movement concentrated on education of women, on establishing mosques, on establishing schools, and organized itself. It has a constitution, and it was divided into three basic councils. Let's say a council of ulama, a council of administration, and first aid groups. And this structure was respected at different levels, at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. And you see that the movement tried to reach to bring the Muslims, Sunni Muslims, Maliki Muslims especially, to its way of thinking, to its way of going back to this tradition of the pious predecessors. So I mean, by following the steps of the Prophet, by following the steps of this Salafi tradition, Salaf Salih, that it is a terminology that it is repeated several times. Then we had in the mid-80s, movement itself, a kind of but the movement itself was divided, and interestingly, what I mentioned in the book, that the movement was established to fight the bid'ah, to fight innovation and religion, to fight heresy, and Islamic innovation and religion. But it found itself, I mean, during the 80s, having an internal schism, an internal division between two camps, a camp in Jos and another one in Kaduna, a group behind the leader, Sheikh Ismail Idris, and another group behind Sheikh, he's not a Sheikh, but more, a leader, Sheikh, he's not a Sheikh, Musa Megando, late Musa Megando in Kaduna, and you have a kind of, blames, a kind of discourse, internal discourse, and even the production within the movement itself was also in Arabic, so it was also Eritrean, and then the same accusations that we found towards Sufis are repeated again within the movement itself. During the mid-80s. And there were many attempts to reconciliation between Izala factions, but it failed. They are adherents, who are more with the Sheikh Ismail Idris and Jos, others with Kaduna, and they are a third group probably of members of the movement who try to take distance to both groups. But as I said in the beginning, that I never expected. Well, I interviewed many people, many leaders, many adherents, and the answer was always the same. That nobody expected the reunification at this time, at our time. It was always the same sentence. At our time, probably in 50 years, 100 years, we will come together. But at that time, nobody expected a kind of reunification. That's why I say that my work is limited by this division. What I try to do with the development of Izala, I try to put it in a wider context, which is the context of the re-implementation of Islamic law, and probably, as you know, in '99, Nigeria entered the Fourth Republic. They had four attempts to go. And at that time, 12 states among 36 re-implemented the so-called Sharia law. And I raised the question, if the re-implementation of Islamic law was an opportunity for Izala and Sufis to come together and to develop probably a project for the Muslim community in Nigeria, and to try to follow the discourse within Nigeria. And in fact, some of the results probably that the re-implementation was more a kind of political campaign started by one single governor of the north, and it has taken by the Muslim groups, and the only one who opposed this Sharia re-implementation was the Shiites, so another Muslim group within the Muslim community. I tried to raise the question if Izala adopted this Sharia implementation. It was an opportunity for a kind of reorientation of the movement. If the Sharia project itself fits into the doctrine of the Izala, And this is this type of questions that I try to raise. While Sharia law controversy, as you know, is an old controversy in the country since the British colonial time, who tried to implement a kind of indirect rule. The Muslims tried to reinstall the Sharia in 79 within the first discussion of the constitution, and it came back again in 1999. So I raised these questions related to the validity of this question, and if the conflict between Izala and the Sufi Brotherhoods is over, and if this project as a whole gives an opportunity to Izala to reorient itself, again, as an organization that struggled from the 70s to establish itself as a defender of Islam, or what has to be Islam from its perspective. And the whole thing, I put it in a kind of theoretical framework. Probably, if you come back to the publication, I try to apply the models, but I tended to apply the theory by Pierre Bourdieu, this theory of the field, and how this notion of field is a dynamic one, and how the Izala tries to shift from the religious to the political, and how this controversy shows, or how Bourdieu's theory tries to explain what is going on in Nigeria. So Nigeria is not only Izala, it's not only Sufi, it is more than that. There are more and more groups. So if you look at it from outside, you see they're all, if you go in, you see the differences. And if you have a project like Sharia, then it became a unity of the Muslim Ummah, probably against Christians within a federation. And then I raised several questions, related to how Christians, Muslims, and others answered this Sharia implementation, and one of them was the Izala. And probably the second one that I try to apply, this theory of mark theory by Rodney Stark, who showed or who compared those religious, and then affiliation and conflict is always related to the offer of those groups. So sometimes you are Izala, or today you are Izala, probably tomorrow you are Sufi, and after tomorrow you step back, you are not belonging to any group. And I try to find arguments to this theory, because he's speaking. Rodney Stark was speaking of a religious market, and then I try to apply this notion to the Nigerian context, to show that indeed it is a market of offer and demand, and then this market is also marked by concurrence of different affiliations and different groups. Um, um, uh, yes. So this Nigerian religious market is complicated, and marked by high competition for space. And Izala, to some extent, succeeded to get the share of the cake, and is established as a counterpart to Sufis. It changed its strategy of confrontation towards other Islamic groups, and concentrated on dawah activities and education. But through the division of the movement, Muslim-Christian debates, while among others, the discussion of bid'ah or innovation appears irrelevant. So the movement, let me say, found the Sharia implementation as an option for a new and more effective reorientation. This is basically what I have to say about this publication. But I repeat myself. My work is limited to 2012. And then what I introduced when I spoke, or when I wrote about the movement, or about the Izala movement.
Thank you very much, Ramzi, for the very interesting presentation. And now I will invite Amina to give us her thoughts about the book she read. So Amina, please.
Thank you, Azza. Thank you so much, Professor Ben Amara. Thank you for contributing with your book to the study of Islam in contemporary northern Nigeria, and I think it's really a significant contribution. The Izala movement, Jama'atu Izalat al-Bida' wa Iqamat al-Sunnah, is one of the largest Sunni societies in Nigeria, Chad, Niger, and Cameroon, and although considered as a Salafi movement by outsiders, the Izala group doesn't see itself as such, and I think the book does provide this significant clarification that West Africa remains an important space to understand Sufism today. And as you trace it through historicities and various contextual nuances, as you said, placing it in larger context. So I think from my reading, what your book, Professor Amara, does is really focus on perception, not only from your stance as an anthropologist, but also as a scholar on Islam and Sufism. You unveil the fabric and you halt the domaining of the religious to its singular trope, which the social or mainstream understandings have covered religious groups such as the Izala movement with. So your emphasis that the social organization of religious groups must also be considered as a social enterprise, I thought was really an important one to think of. The various networks upon which the religious groups sustain themselves is one that is really important to think with as we consider the continuity and the economic dimension of the Izala movement through its members and followers and leaders. So on the other hand, I think religious groups, as the scholar on Sufism, Oludamini Obinake argued, haven't been studied as intellectual traditions, but rather they've only been studied for their anthropological significance and ethnographic data. And I was thinking about African philosophy. So as we think about African philosophy, as Colin Hutunji has said or redefined, is a set of texts written by Africans and described as philosophical by the authors themselves. So I tried to think about, while reading the book, about the Izala movement as a school of thought that could be considered as an African philosophy. And perhaps my first question lays within that. Because we come to understand the Izala movement's contribution to the understanding of the human through the book. And so my first question is, how could we perhaps consider the learnings of the Izala movement as a philosophy, especially through their understanding of Sharia? What is their understanding of humanity, and how is the human defended and brought to the center for the followers of the Izala movement? And my second question and thinking was really around methodology, thinking especially on the reunification of the Izala movement. And I was thinking with Amina Mama, who argued that as a point of departure while doing research in an African context, to actually realize that the intellectual ethics that we endeavor within such research, as you did, Professor Ben Amara, isn't necessarily universal because it's so profoundly shaped by the regional and historical contexts and struggles. But also that this kind of research should be led by Africans themselves, as we tend to see that a lot of the work that's been produced on Sufi movements in West Africa and North Africa has often been produced by Western academics. So the fragmentation of religious groups, as you present in the book, is often explained by theoretical models, which rarely take into consideration their unification and the solidarity which the Izala movement has come to do in 2011 after its fragmentation. And as such, really echoing your words and your thinking that no condition is permanent. And this is an emphasis that you bring also at the end of your book, which was a really important questioning and argument. So while theoretical models often remain fixed in time and space, one must ask and stress on thinking about the ways in which to adapt the theoretical model to explain and expand on specific changes and development. And so my second question is on what kind of theoretical model do you suggest today that one should use while approaching research on religious organizations, especially Sufi groups, considering that the fieldwork of this book, which was your thesis project, took place many years ago. So when we think about the contemporary and the now, how do we move forward without adopting those theoretical models that can often choke us as academics going into the field? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, for these reflections. Well, it took me back to to a debate that it was related to my work. But let me first react to your second question by a sentence that I used also in my book by an Orientalist, Bernard Lewis, who said, well, the bid'ah of today may become the sunnah of tomorrow. It is indeed this dynamic aspect of those religious movements that you cannot just study and say this is the genesis of one or the other movement. And I try to look at the Izala at a particular probably three predecessors, Roman Dolmaya, we have Muhammad Sani Umar, Osman Khan. They try to look at the movement from different perspectives. Sometimes it's the relationship to the Sufis, sometimes it's only on the local aspect in Kano state or Kano as a region, sometimes as a project of modernity. I looked more at the division and what has to be done. I think there is no model of doing it. Is the field, and from a perspective of an anthropologist. And I remember at that time when I spoke to several Izala scholars and leaders, they expected that I'm going to produce a history of the movement itself, a history of the Izala itself. But I always try to defend myself that I'm not going to do that, because I'm not the historian of the movement. I remember that the book by Ismail Idris and Ziga, who has been published in '92, where I stand. It is a kind of history of the movement, and this is the history from within, from the leaders who try to write this history. But at the same time, I was asked several times if I belong to if I'm a member of Izala, if I'm a member of the Qadiriyya, if I'm a member of the Tijaniya. I tried to answer that I'm a scholar, and as a scholar, I'm not defending any doctrine of the movement. And if you see that within the book itself, I'm not discussing any theological discourse and saying this is probably. I looked at the curriculum of the Izala within their schools. I looked there probably about. I looked after their doctrinal orientation, but I was not interested to look at their theological answers, theological answer to Sufism, or what Sufism is. Sorry, but if I was more interested on those discourses, and interestingly, as I said, sometimes this discourse and this debate was at a high level. It was written in Arabic, and probably Arabic was accessible to the sheikhs, to those who are familiar with the language, to those who are familiar with be translated into the masses. But this discourse indeed was, while without conducting, without accessing this field, I was not able also to touch and to find this literature that was produced also in Arabic during the time of the division. And then how to evaluate it and how to analyze it, I don't think that there is, well, perfect way or one way to do it. At the time, I was probably reading Rodney Stark, reading Bourdieu, and the third one that they didn't mention here, White House, and I tried to apply those models. So, but when I was on the field itself, I didn't plan to use those theoretical models to try to explain what is going on. I think I came to this theoretical explanation
Did we lose him? Okay, he's back.
Can you listen to me now?
Yes.
Sorry. I
Mm.
said, well, well, there are two options or three options. You go to the field with a theory in mind, you go to the field without any theoretical background, or you come back from the field and you might identify a theoretical framework to your work. And this is the other three possibilities. And in my case, I just try to discover a field that I don't know. So I decided to go to Nigeria because, well, I was familiar with the literature that has been published on Nigeria, but I never visited the country. And then after conducting my interviews, I tried to find a kind of theoretical explanation of what is going on. An advice, what has to be done, or what is the perfect model, or what is the perfect theoretical model to be applied. So depending on your fieldwork, depending on your area of research, depending on your topic, depending on your tools that your question. Um, to your, I think learning was a basic element, and since the establishment of the Izala, since the end of the 70s and beginning of the 80s, and I think the movement itself tried to identify itself with one orientation, and one of it was this well, the term learning, and I think learning is the way, and was the way, and the tool to apply its own doctrine. You have your own schools, you have your primary schools, you have your even diploma section of Izala. Your diploma is also recognized by the state, by the Nigerian state, and in Zaria. So the movement itself tried to concentrate on this aspect of learning. And we should not also forget that the learning is also linked to the education of women in a society that was more or less conservative. So they challenged also Sufi brotherhoods to also to send their daughters and their wives to go and look for learning and to attend schools and to learn Arabic, to learn fiqh and so on. And it was also a way to I remember one of the answers of the shape. I mean, education cannot happen if you ignore women, because education happens at home, but happens at school, and education also should begin with children, and children are to be educated by their mothers than by their fathers, and that's why the movement concentrated on the education of women I mean, as a main subject and the main doctrine since its establishment.
Yes, thank you very much, Ramzi, for your response to Amina's questions. And I think Amina is somehow inviting us to rethink our way of looking at local production of knowledge, you know, and how does it speaks to the hegemonic kind of education that was brought by the colonizers. And I think this is also a very interesting way to look at it as it's a local way of knowledge production. I mean, given the fact that the history of the whole of the region, and you know, this kind of nostalgia of going back to the Sokoto Caliphate, where like the one founded by Umar Danfodio, and as if, I mean, it's for them, it's the nostalgia to go back to this is why I actually also used this idea of the re-implementation of Sharia, because Sharia was already was there, you know, and it was banned by the British government, which I also find it interesting because it also shows like how different. I mean, you talked about indirect rule and how this indirect rule was playing differently in different contexts, because in Sudan, Sharia was not banned. In fact, Sharia was going hand by hand with Western education. So you find people who are educated in the Islamic education, and you find people who went in the line of the Western education. So it's interesting to see how is it different in your case. I mean, if you have something to respond to that, yeah, we can give you like 2 minutes or 1 minute to respond. Then I would like to listen to quickly we collect questions from the audience. So yes.
Thank you, Asa.
Amina.
Thank you so much, Professor Ben Amara. That was really insightful. I think the question of hegemony came to mind as well, and I was wondering if you could perhaps tell us about the kinds of intellectual hegemonies that were predominantly sort of present within the Izala movement that you've noticed but didn't necessarily expect to see within that context. And perhaps if you could also just shed a light a bit on your positionality as a Tunisian scholar going into Nigeria to study the Sufi group, the Izala movement and Sufi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, and also to Azza. Well, this notion of hegemony, well, it seems also to be fundamental in the movement itself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but let me say it is more linked to the leaders, more to the masses or to the adherents. Abu Bakr Bumi, who was influential because of his capacity, because he translated the sacred book, he translated the Quran into Hausa, رد الأذهان إلى معاني القرآن, while the translation of the meaning of the Quran into Hausa language. And then I think also he was not, but he was also influential because of his position and involvement in politics. You know, he was the one probably who was more close to the Sardauna at that time. He was traveling with contacts to Saudi Arabia. He has also contact to other Arab countries, and I think the Izala doctrine itself was based on started, you know, facing the influence of Sufism. You know, I mean, historically we have from the 19th until the 40s and the 50s conflict of hegemony between the Qadiriyya and the Tijaniyya. What is the right way to behave? To be a Tijani or to be a Qadiri? How to pray? How to, what to practice? What kind of litanies? What kind of prayers and so on. At one particular moment, we have Abu Bakr Gumi who appeared, who said, both of you are wrong. We have another hegemony facing both Sufi brotherhoods. And after him, we have a movement. We have the Izala as a movement while facing the hegemony of the Sufis. We have a kind of a conflict between both. But they are not the only ones. As probably the book, I try to give some examples of other religious groups, other Islamic groups in Nigeria. We have the Shi'is, we have Jama'at al-Islam, we have the Quraniyun, we have the Salafiyya, we have other Sufi movements other than the Qadiriyya and the Tijaniyya, and then probably we have a multiplicity of hegemonies. Well, hegemony and plural, and the whole thing, you should put it in a wider context. While Muslims are not the only religious community in Nigeria, we have Christians with other orientations. We have other African traditional religions, and to put it together in a wider context, the context of the federation, and this federation cannot adopt any religion as a state religion, while paragraph 10 of the Constitution. But at the same time, this Constitution gives, to every religious group to practice its own religion. While paragraph 38, so which hegemony you should follow and which orientation. From outside, they are Christians, they are Muslims and others, and from inside, they are different groups. And I just mentioned a few, and I just analyzed only one. Out of this religious complexity. So your second point of I was surprised that I have access to the movement. I expected more difficulty to work on the Izala, but let me give you how it started. I remember for the first time end of 2006, I collected some information on the Izala, and I give a lecture at the University of Jos, at the Department of Religious Studies. Well, at that time, a lot of Izala adherents or students attended this lecture, and they invited me to contact the leader at the time, Sheikh Jingir, because they were not satisfied with what I presented. They invited me to correct myself about the movement itself, about its establishment, and being received by the leader at that time. It opened doors to other places, to Kano, to Kaduna, to Sokoto, to Borno State, but from my side, it was not the only perspective, I was not the one who's supposed to write the history of the movement and to give or to reflect only a positive reflection on the movement. But I should say, while compared to other colleagues, I have access. I can take notes. I can make photos. I moved, I moved almost to all states of the north. But compared to I remember at the time a colleague, an American colleague, from political science.
I
she
think
has
we
a lot of
lost him.
problems to access women. So just to let you know, from my side, being a Tunisian, being a Muslim, and at least speaking Arabic was an added value. While most of these sheikhs that I interviewed, they speak Arabic fluently, and probably it was a fundamental element to communicate with the sheikhs, first of all, in Arabic. And it was being a Muslim to speak in Arabic. Nevertheless, I was asked several times why I'm visiting Nigeria. What is the reason that I'm writing on Izala? And I always defended myself, saying that I'm a scholar. I'm affiliated to a university, and I'm conducting a work on the movement like many other scholars. And even some material or a lot of material that I collected, there are a lot of Izala adherents who wrote on the movement. There are so many MAs and PhDs also produced locally in Nigeria on the movement. So people are used to this kind of research on religious movements.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ramzi, for your response. I just want to know if there is anyone from the audience who like to raise a question. Okay, so if there's no question, I think it's time for us. I mean, we are running out of time, so we like to close the session. And thank you very much, Dr. Ramzi, for your presentation. And we are very glad to have you here and just give us also a different perspective on the Izala movement. It was really interesting, and it was really a lively discussion. Thank you very much, Amina, for your reflections. They are also gave us also a kind of a different perspective to look at the whole idea of local knowledge production and the hegemony of knowledge in Africa. And I really appreciate your comments. This is now we are going to end the session, and we hope to see you next week. We have the book from Gilbert Chang, and we all are looking forward to the launch of the book of Gilbert Chang about the radio and other stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you also.